What's up, guys? It has been with 2020 election. We are one day away from the election. I've started this channel about 6 months ago, but we are only one day away. And what I want to do today is I want to look at Trump's best case scenario electoral college and Biden's best case scenario electoral college. And then I'm going to go with what my predictions are one day out, my final electoral college predictions right now. And I also, while I'm doing this, I want to reference some polls we've seen recently. About a week ago, Biden was up about 5 points in the battle rounds, but we see it's tightening up. Trump's getting up into the 46s, and it's only a 2.7% difference. So this has changed everything that I've thought for before. So let's just dive right into it. First, what I'm going to look at is Trump's best case scenario here. So in Trump's best case scenario, and I've narrowed them. So I think that, but let's just start it here. So I think in Trump's best case scenario, he wins Texas. I'm even going to call this a likely at this point. His best case scenario. Iowa also likely. Ohio lean. I think that in Trump's best case scenario, Georgia is a lean state right here. And then going forward off of this map, I think that in Trump's best case scenario, he wins Florida. There's an ABC news poll that had him up by 2 points, so an A+ rated poll. But regardless, I think on either side, even in Biden's best case scenario, I don't think he wins by more than 2 points. Overall, in my predictions, I have Florida going to Trump, but still, I think it's going to be by under 2 points, even in Trump's best case scenario. Moving on to North Carolina, I also consider I think North Carolina and Florida are going to track each other pretty well, even though they're definitely kind of different. This is kind of what I think right now. Moving on to Arizona, I'm gonna also include Arizona kind of in this tilt column. I think Trump could win it by more than 2 points, but in my best case scenario, I'm going to purposely be a little bit more narrower. So I think that kind of all of the outcomes are going to kind of range. I would say 90% of the outcomes are going to be between Biden's best case scenario and Trump's best case scenario. And so we've seen polls in these states where Trump is up. So by no means is this a stretch. Am I trying to say, oh, maybe Trump could win the state? I don't think this is a stretch by any means. And then next up would be in the state of Pennsylvania, which I have leaning. And if we look at Pennsylvania, this has been the biggest shock for me. So we see that Wisconsin and Michigan are at 6.6 and 5.5. But if we look more closely at Pennsylvania, 2.9. I mean, this is clearly within the margin of error. And we've seen 3 polls out in the past day or two that have Trump up. Now, a caveat to this is that these polls do come from more right-leaning pollsters. And if we kind of look at more of the nonpartisan pollsters, we see Biden +7, Biden +4, Biden +6. But in 2016, the Trafalgar Group was one of the more accurate pollsters here, and their margin of error is pretty low. And so we see Trump +2, Trump +1, Trump +2, and it takes the average and lower. So if we look at before about a week ago, we can see that Biden was, or let's see, this was about 3 weeks ago when Biden was up by 7, and he was above kind of the magic 50 number that you kind of need to have confidence. Right now, it's under 3 points, and Biden's at 49, Trump's at 46. I mean, this is as close as it can get, but by no means is this a stretch that Trump is going to win Pennsylvania. I think Trump's path to victory definitely comes through the state of Pennsylvania here. So moving on to some of these other states, I still do think in Trump's best case scenario he loses the state of Minnesota. I also think that he loses New Hampshire, and I think he loses the state of Nevada by a lean margin. And I think this just goes to show that Biden is a better candidate. I think Biden's going to overperform Hillary Clinton in a lot of these states. However, it's not going to matter if Trump wins. And in Trump's best case scenario, I do have him winning right here. In Wisconsin and in Michigan, I still have these heads going to Biden in his best case scenario. But one thing that I want to say, I don't think that in Trump's best case scenario he would win the state. I don't think that Trump's best case scenario is that unlikely. I mean, predict it has it at Trump winning at a 40% chance. Um, 538 has it at a 10% chance. But I think what people are realizing, and Nate Silver is saying this, that he actually thinks that, I mean, a Trump victory isn't like out of the ordinary. And we saw this in 2016. I mean, if we look at Pennsylvania 2016, so Hillary Clinton was up by 1.9% in the kind of the average. But we even saw, if we click on the 2016 kind of polling results the day before. So there was a 2.6% flip, but we can see that the Trafalgar group only had Trump up by 1 point, and he's up by 2 points. Now we can see the Susquehanna group had Clinton up by 2, and now they have Trump up. So if we kind of look at these specific polls, we can see that Trump is actually outperforming some of these polls than he did in 2016, which is interesting, especially in a very contested state of Pennsylvania. So going back out, so this is, I think, is Trump's best case scenario, and it's more likely than people think. Going back to kind of where I was before, I'm going to change this to what I think if it's Biden's best case scenario here. So, still think he would win, but okay. Looking at this, I think that in Biden's best case scenario, he wins these 3 states by a likely margin. The polls had the average of these 3 states kind of right at it. So I think Michigan's like right at about 5 points, Wisconsin's about 6 points, and Minnesota's even more. So I think that in Biden's best case scenario, he kind of matches these poll numbers. I don't think that Biden's going to outperform the polls here, just because we saw in 2016 that these polls were definitely skewed towards Hillary Clinton. But I think that in Biden's best case scenario, if he firmly holds these states, moving on to some of the lean states, I think that Nevada could be a likely state. Right now, I'm going to say it's best case scenario. And I also think that Pennsylvania is going to be won by a lean margin. And if we look at the polls, if we trust like the Real Clear Politics average of the polls, Biden wins by 2.9. And I don't think that even in his best case scenario, Biden's going to outperform the polls by over 2 points to kind of get to that likely margin. So that's why I have Pennsylvania here. Moving on to some of the other states, I also think that New Hampshire could kind of go in the likely column in Biden's best case scenario. Still, Texas, I still think would go to President Trump even in Biden's best case scenario. Voter turnout is very, very high in Texas, but if we look at the polls, there just aren't any polls that have Biden up. They've had it tied within the margin of error. However, if we're going to assume that the polls tend to skew towards Biden and there's no polls that have Biden up, I think we can very safely say that Texas is going to stay in the Republican column for one more election. I'm not talking about 2024 when I think Texas really is going to be a pure toss-up. And also going into Iowa and Ohio, I kind of have the similar logic here. I think both these states are going to go to President Trump, even in Biden's best case scenario. I saw that Biden was campaigning in the state of Iowa, which just shocked me. Because, yes, there are some polls that have him tied within the margin of error, which means that Trump is still up a little bit. But Ohio is one of those like cherry on top states. In the last day of campaigning, I don't know what his campaign is telling him to do. I think it's a little bit of overconfidence. And if Biden is just really worried about winning, which I think increasingly he should be, and I think that the polls in Pennsylvania reflect this, they're getting closer. We see that Trump is up in some of the polls. Biden should be campaigning in Pennsylvania. She should be campaigning in North Carolina, Florida, even these. He should not be campaigning in Ohio, Iowa, or Texas. So I really don't know what their logic is right there. Moving on to Arizona, I think in Biden's best case scenario, then he would carry Arizona by a lean margin. I think in reality, it's probably going to be closer to a tilt margin. But I think if Biden really kind of overperforms expectations, then he definitely could win the state by a lean margin. Um, Going into Florida, and I kind of talked about this before. Florida, I think is going to be decided within 2 percentage points on either side, and I feel pretty strongly about that. That the voter registration data would show that the Republicans are doing a lot better. But I think in Biden's best case scenario, he wins the state, even though at this point I don't think it's very likely that he wins Florida. Same with Georgia. I honestly think, and we see this on Predicted, that Biden's chances in Georgia are actually higher than they are in Florida right now, which I think is kind of ironic because Florida is kind of this perennial swing state, while Georgia typically has been in the Republican column. But in Biden's best case scenario, I think Georgia is easier for him to pull off than Ohio, Iowa, or Texas right now. And then lastly, in the state of North Carolina, I also still think in Biden's best case scenario, it's only in a tilt margin. So you have 349 to 188. I still don't think this is kind of like a landslide territory. Well, it does look good in terms of the numbers. Barack Obama had a larger margin in 2008, and I still don't think it's likely that Biden does a full sweep in the Sun Belt. With kind of these four states here, and I do think that President Trump's probably going to win it. So there you go. Those are kind of my big predictions there on terms of like the best case scenario. Now I'm going to quickly go into what I think my predictions are going to be right now. So I'm just going to fill these in quickly just to kind of show y'all. So just to add some commentary here, this is kind of where I see most of the states right now. I think Arizona is really kind of in a limbo right now. So this is where I see the race right now. And just to fill in these, I see it as a 290, 248. But really, I do think this race is going to come down to these three states: Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Arizona. I can feel pretty confident calling Florida and Georgia for the Republicans. And I feel fairly confident calling Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan and Nevada for Joe Biden. Where this race is going to come down to is the state of Pennsylvania. And increasingly, I think it is likely that Trump wins Pennsylvania. I'd never really thought about this before. But clearly, in the average of the polls, we can see that Trump is or is performing better in Pennsylvania than out of all the Rust Belt states that he won in 2016. I don't think that Iowa or Ohio or Texas are going to be particularly competitive right now. But right now, I think this is about like I think that Trump probably has a 1 in 3 chance to win. Because I think that in 1 out of 3 scenarios, then he wins both these states. I think that in 1 in 3 scenarios, it ends up like this. And then I think in the last third of the scenario, then Biden wins here and here, and maybe even in Florida. But that's where I see the race right now. Drop a comment, drop a like, subscribe if you haven't already. Let me know what you think, whether you think my predictions are accurate. And I would love to hear from you. So thank you guys for watching, and be on the lookout for another video tonight.